Hello, this is Jeff Anoble, and I don't want this to sound kind of pretentious or like I'm bragging or anything. I certainly don't feel that way. It's just something that I did on the movie Day of the Dead that I'm very proud of, and I was very young at the time, so it made quite an impression on my life. And I would just like to share that story with family and friends, especially my nephew and anyone else that loves the movie Day of the Dead and might be interested in like some of the maybe kind of the behind the scenes stories and how it kind of all happened for the zombie extras anyway. So this is my story of working on Day of the Dead in 1984. But it starts back in Pittsburgh when I was growing up, very young, single digits. My dad was a huge fan of horror films, especially the old classic Universal Studios stuff, Frankenstein, etc. And he and I would watch a show every Saturday night that he recommended called Chilly Billy, which is a local horror movie show on Saturday nights in Pittsburgh, hosted by none other than Bill Cardille. So one night they have Night of the Living Dead on Chilly Billy, and I see Bill Cardille in the movie, which was wild for me, being like maybe I was 11 years old or so.
Are they slow moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
My dad, of course, told me it was made in Pittsburgh, which impressed me even more. After the movie, or at some point during the movie, he had George Romero on as a guest to talk about his upcoming movie, which I didn't know about. It was the sequel to Night called Dawn of the Dead. And George showed clips from the film, mostly of stuff in the mall, when the bikers were killing zombies. Needless to say, I was more than anxious to see the film when it came out, and I did at the local Cinema World in West Mifflin, around where Century 3 Mall was located. It was a packed house and was a great experience seeing it with a large group like that. Well, after that, I was definitely a number one fanboy of everything Dawn of the Dead and George Romero. I would save all the newspaper clippings, bought the poster books, the novel, everything I could find, which wasn't much back in those days. I even looked Tom Savini's name up in the local phone book and found his number and wound up calling him to tell him what a big fan I was of him and the movie. He patiently would answer my makeup effects questions I had for him, and after a period of time, I asked him what he was doing currently. He told me he was working on a movie called Creepshow. I somehow asked to visit him on the set, and he said, sure, no problem, which was great. So I had my dad drive me out 4th of July weekend of 1981 to meet Tom Savini. It was a pre production stage of Creepshow, and I got to see the sets, which were not quite finished except for the basement set from the Crate episode, which was the most complete at the time. They had the tombstones done from the Father's Day episode as well. Tom was actually sculpting the corpse, Nate, um, in clay that day as I sat nearby talking to him, and that was from Father's Day. It was a day to remember for sure, but little did I know more incredible memories were to come. In 1984, a friend of mine told me about a number to call to be a zombie in George's final part of the zombie trilogy, Day of the Dead. Needless to say, I called quickly and set the whole thing up. Then the kind girl on the phone asked me my age, and I innocently said I was 17. She then informed me I had to be 18 to work on the movie. Devastated I was, to say the least. How was I going to miss out on being a zombie in George's last zombie movie? How? I couldn't believe it. Then a thought entered my head, and I dialed the number again. Hello, I said. My brother just got off the phone with you, talking in my fakest and deepest voice. Oh, the girl said, I remember him. Then I said, yeah, he was pretty disappointed he couldn't be in the movie. And she apologized and said she felt bad. Then I said, well, I'm a fan of George Romero as well, and I might as well be in the movie. So she took my new information, my new name of Joe, which was my father's name, instead of Jeff, and I said my age was 19 to make it sound not so obvious of my scheme. To this day, I do not know if that girl knew I was faking my voice or or not, and just let me on the movie, and knew it was me all along. But I am thankful either way. I wouldn't be denied this once in a lifetime opportunity. The first filming day was at a location called the Nike Missile Base. There's several in the Pittsburgh area, and I'm not quite sure which one this was. And it was an underground facility that they used only for the large elevator scene. Though the entrance, the elevator platform, up top was built on a field on Sanibel Island off the southwest coast of Florida, near Fort Myers. So my father and my friend's father took us out that day, drove us out in the morning. We went through an assembly line of wardrobe and had our hands spray painted with this colored hairspray stuff. Then our eyes were blackened so it would blend into the masks. It would blend it into the masks we were wearing. Since we were way off in the background, we were going to be wearing masks. Some of the featured zombies in the front got full-on appliance makeups. One of them being Vince Servinski, who I recognized. He was the guy in Night of the Living Dead who shoots one of the lead characters in the movie at the end. So we all assembled on the elevator, and George stepped on for a publicity shot. I reached for him and knew I was pretty close to being the picture. That picture I still see to this day and is the main photo used to advertise George's film school in Pittsburgh. One other thing happened that day. A C-stand holding a reflector or something was blown over by the wind and fell down onto the platform. Someone was in fact hurt and taken to the hospital. I believe I heard later that George would visit that person at the hospital. After that, we shot the scene of us being lowered down and exiting and walking toward the camera. I think we did it at least 2 times, maybe more. I couldn't believe I was a zombie in George's movie. Then it was over. Since we had to wait for our dads to pick us up, we sat on the curb and saw pretty much every soul that was there leave, including George, who waved goodbye from his car. It was a great day to remember, but why not call that number again? And so I did, and this time was told to go to the wampum mine in Beaver, Pennsylvania, which is now called Wampum Storage. It was very early in the morning and was about 50 minutes from where I lived in Brentwood, Pennsylvania. This time I went out with another friend of mine, Steve Dental. I did not know what to expect. Once again, we were put in wardrobe of clothes made to look old. We were all waiting around in the room where many of the dialogue scenes happen in the movie with the cast. This was the main area where we would wait and eat our boxed lunch, which is, if I remember, a ham sandwich, an apple, and a little jug of juice like we would get in grade school. As I was sitting there, I saw Tom Savini walking around looking at all of us. I knew he was picking some special zombies out. I held my breath and hoped he would notice me. I had a large amount of hair back in those days, pretty good fro, I would say. They didn't call me Jeff Fro in high school for nothing. Tom pointed toward me and said to another guy, him or something like that. I was loving it. Soon after, the other guy came over and asked me to follow him. I told him my name was Jeff. I had been telling all the other people at check-in my name was Joe, of course, as I was playing the 19-year-old, not the 17-year-old I was. But for the makeup crew and Tom, I would use my real name, Jeff. I met Greg Nicotero for a while and was led around by him before going to Tom. Greg was a great guy and made a strong impression on me. He, of course, is now doing Walking Dead, directing episodes, and doing many other things. He also created with another guy, Howard Berger, and another friend, KNB Effects. Look the work up someday and be amazed at all they have done. I had a chance to see many of the hallways and labs used for the scenes in the movie, and the body parts Logan was feeding to Bub were just casually lying around. Finally, I got to Tom, and he did a squib setup on the back of my head and blended it in perfectly. as many around us said it looked great. I was led to the set, and a mattress was placed behind me to fall back on. The scene with Gary Clark, who plays Steele, was set up and rehearsed. Strangely, the pants they gave me to wear, the zipper was stuck open, and one of the wardrobe people noticed and came over with needle and thread. Yikes, but I was okay. The effects crew made a few jokes at the girl's expense, who was kneeling in front of my crotch, sewing my zipper closed. The girl called me Joe, and Greg Nicotero corrected her, saying my name is Jeff. She looked puzzled. I said Joe is my middle name, and I go by both sometimes. There was an uncomfortable pause, but thankfully the situation was saved by an assistant director yelling ready. So the scene played out in one take. I must say, having the weight of that blood pack on my head that whole time, when it blew out, my head felt instantly lighter, like my brains had been blown out. It was great. Afterward, I was finished for the day, but was able to hang with the filming crew and not go back with the zombies in the waiting area. So I moved about freely and watched several more machine gun scenes filmed with Steele. Including him pounding on the door. I talked to him briefly, but he wasn't that interested in getting to know me, giving very short answers. When I later saw the film and realized how much he hates zombies, I thought, wow, he was a pretty good method actor, and that's why he wasn't so friendly toward me, as I was the enemy, the very pus brains that he hated. It wasn't until years later, in 2017, 33 years later, when I ran into Gary at an Evans City Living Dead weekend event, that he told me he had hurt his leg very bad that day and was in a lot of pain. I told him the story first about me thinking he was a great method actor. That day he actually spent a good amount of time talking to me and my young nephew Blake, and we talked about the short life of Ralph Marrero, who played Rickles in the film. Sadly, Gary died in 2020, but I'm so glad I had the chance to see him again after all those years. After that day of filming, I remember coming home and writing on my calendar, the greatest day in my life, shot in the head by Steele. Little did I know there was one more big day coming. My cousin-in-law was coming into town for Thanksgiving weekend 1984, and I thought I would get him to be a zombie with me in Day of the Dead. So I called again and set it up. We drove out early in the morning while it was still dark, and arrived and went through the same routine. He got a kick out of calling me Joe. Once again, waiting in that main room with tables, I was picked out again for something. I hooked back up with Greg Nicotero and was escorted into a large makeup room, this time with many barbershop chairs, and introduced to a man named Howard Berger, who would be doing my makeup. This is the zombie he transformed me into that day. The makeup guys would take Polaroids of their work when it was finished, many of which included my own, ended up being seen on the Day of the Dead DVD release. I asked if I could have one for my memories, and the guy told me they don't usually do that, but he snapped another picture for me and gave me the Polaroid, which I still have. When I went back to find my cousin, he was in a state of shock how insane I looked. I told him I had to wait somewhere else for the scene, and to his credit, he would spend the majority of the day alone hanging out with other zombies in straight makeup. What I mean is just facial makeup with a few scars here and there. I went back to a smaller room with couches and hung out with the close-up zombies with appliance makeups. We talked, and I ended up meeting the guy from Dawn of the Dead who was shooting zombies with a scope rifle and enjoying himself, saying,
"Ah, missed."
It was great meeting him. At one point, waiting for the next scene, we were escorted to a stone-rounded wall backdrop where Steele had shot many zombies with a machine gun. Photos were taken of us against this backdrop. And little did I know these photos would be used not only for some lobby cards for the film, but would make an appearance in Forrest Ackerman's legendary magazine Famous Monsters, and finally would end up being the cover for a great book on George Romero called The Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh. The scene we shot that day was the one where Rickles is being pulled down from behind by a horde of zombies. It was assisted directed by John Harrison, who was the screwdriver zombie in Dawn, and wrote the musical scores for both Creepshow and Day of the Dead. So we pulled Rickles down and then did some other shots of him down on the ground shooting up at a zombie. During breaks, Ralph Marrero, who played Rickles, actually came up to me and started a long conversation about my life, wanting to get to know me. I found out he was from New York. This was the exact opposite of Gary Clark, who played Steele, by the way, in terms of friendliness. It was a wonderful, very long day. It was great being that zombie because I could just roam around anywhere and look at the filming locations. I met George's wife, Christine Forrest, and told her how much their movies meant to me, including her work in Martin and Night Riders. It was great. I did end up, however, with a terrible migraine headache, I guess from the makeup appliance on my brow. So I was like a real zombie by the time I left. I let my cousin drive home, and it was dark by the time we left. I must have drifted off, and he, not being from the Pittsburgh area, got tremendously lost. And I had no sense of direction back in those days, so he ended up going in a convenience store to ask for directions, in full zombie makeup. The first thing he said, of course, to the guy at the convenience store was, "I'm not from around here." And the guy behind the counter simply said, "Obviously." We got a sense of the way home and finally arrived back a couple hours later. But it was well worth it. Well, that's the story. I ended up with a couple hats saying I was a zombie in Day of the Dead, a couple fake newspapers saying The Dead Walk, 3 crisp $1 bills, our pay on the movie, $1 a day, that I still have framed, and more profoundly for me, my zombie image on lobby cards, in a magazine, and on the cover of a book. Not bad for a kid who grew up in Pittsburgh, loving George Romero's movies, and finally getting a chance to be directed by him and have a squib done by Tom Savini. I'm very grateful for my luck and for those magical days of being 17 years old in Pittsburgh. The next year saw the premiere in downtown Pittsburgh, and then seeing the movie with family and friends. My George Romero and Tom Savini story isn't over yet, however. Stay tuned someday for my day on the Night of the Living Dead remake.